The story is told of the great Reb Chaim of Volozhin, who once had to traverse a very dangerous forest with his students. During that travel, he was accosted by a band of robbers. And the leader of that band, after gathering Rabbi Chaim of Volozhin and his students together, said, "We're going to rob you and then we're going to murder you." All of the students were terrified. They began to pray. And then all of a sudden, Rav Chaim of Volozhin looked at the ringleader, looked him in the eye. And after a few moments, the ringleader, who had just recently told the group that he was going to murder them, said, "Run! Run away and get out of here," thereby saving their lives. After they had run far away, the students turned to their Rebbe, Reb Chaim, and said, "What exactly just went on here?" To which Reb Chaim of Volozhin explained, "When I was first informed by the leader of the robbers what he was going to do to us, I was filled with anger and rage and hatred towards our tormentors. But then I said to myself, if these in fact are going to be my last moments on this earth, I don't want to die in a state of hatred. I don't want to die with such contempt. I don't want to die with such anger in my heart." And so I took a moment to gather my thoughts, to gather my emotions, and I reoriented myself and realized that this individual, these tormentors, these robbers, probably came from a tough upbringing. And I began to empathize with them. And I began to have pity on them. And it was with that attitude and that perspective that I once again looked at my captor, at the ringleader. And it was that look of empathy, of connection, of attachment to the other that the individual perceived and let us go. It must be that in his entire adult life, he never had someone look at him with love in his eyes, but rather always people looked at them and him with contempt and anger. This week we read from Parshat Kedoshim the famous maxim of Yahavta l'reacha kamocha. Love your neighbor as yourself. And Rabbi Akiva famously told us, Zeh klal gadol b'Torah. This is a great principle of the Torah. We often have the question, though. We know that we are in the period of the Omer. The Omer is tinged with sadness, in part because of the tragic death of many, many students of Rabbi Akiva. And the Talmud tells us that the reason suggested as to why they died an unnatural death is because Shelo nagu kavod zeh b'zeh. They did not show honor for their fellow student, for their fellow chavruta. And that begs the question, if we know that Rabbi Akiva was a man who taught and who lived a life of Yahavta l'reacha kamocha as being of primary, paramount importance, how could it be that his students fell so far away from the teachings of their Rebbe? So I'd like to suggest two possible answers to this question. Number one, the students of Rabbi Akiva learned by heart what it meant to love your neighbor as yourself, and they learned all the technical fulfillment and details associated with the mechanics of what it might mean to love a neighbor as oneself. They learned it by heart, but they never took it to heart. They learned it up here in their minds, but they never allowed it to impact and influence their hearts, their emotions, who they were, their personas. That's very important. It's not enough just to learn things by heart, but especially when there are attitudes and perspectives that allow us to function in the best way towards others, we have to also take it to heart. Number two, if we look carefully at the statement, V'yahavta l'reacha kamocha, love your neighbor as yourself, one could suggest that the only time there's an obligation to love someone else is when they are kamocha, when they are like you, when they are like-minded, when they have the same attitudes, when they have the same perspectives on life, on religion, on politics. Then, v'yahavta l'reacha, love your neighbor, kamocha, because he's like you. But we know that that's not what the Torah is teaching us. And that, in fact, we are obligated even more so to find affinity, to find common ground, to find the godliness and the thread that connects all of us, that unites and binds us, especially with those with whom we disagree, especially with those with whom we do not necessarily see eye to eye, where we may have profound disagreements in religion, in politics, in society, in culture, in lots of different arenas of thought and opinion. And it is specifically there that we exercise the muscles of Yahavta L'Recha Kamocha, including and especially when people are not Kamocha. And so Rabbi Akiva's students made that mistake of thinking that the only obligation of loving one's neighbor is when they are exactly the same as they. When in fact, the obligation really kicks in. It's easy to love, or it's easier to love those who are the same as us. But how do we relate? How do we connect? How do we like and even love those with whom we disagree? And so as we enter into Shabbat Parshat Achrimot Kedoshim, I urge us to take to heart the lesson of Yahavta L'Recha Kamocha, not just to learn it by heart, but to take it to heart. And also understand and appreciate, internalize, and commit ourselves to finding that common ground of humanity, that common ground of Jewishness, the unity of the Jewish people that exists, including and especially towards those whom we don't necessarily see eye to eye with. It's a challenge, but it's what makes life most meaningful, is when we extend ourselves to find the love, to find the connection with all of those around us. Shabbat Shalom.